Hi, everybody. My name is Holly Nienkamp, and I am the Manager of Marketing and Communications at the Canadian Liver Foundation. And welcome to another episode of our Meet the Researchers series. This series connects you, our liver disease community, to the actual people who are doing important research and providing care in the liver disease space. Donations to the CLF help us fund this life-saving research and help us to advance prevention, diagnosis, treatment, and even cures for liver disease. Today, we are connecting with Dr. Kamath, who serves as hepatologist, clinician, investigator, and interim division head at the Hospital for Sick Children in Toronto. She is also a professor in the Department of Pediatrics at the University of Toronto. So thank you so much, Binita, for joining us today, and welcome to the series. So I always like to start with that little intro, but if you can begin by sharing a bit more about who you are, and how you got into the liver disease space, that would be perfect.
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me. So I was born and brought up in England, and I did my early training there. And whilst I was there, the way the training is set up in the UK is that we used to rotate from hospital to hospital. And one of the hospitals I was fortunate to be placed at was King's College Hospital in London, which is Europe's largest liver transplant center. And that's where I first experienced pediatric hepatology and pediatric liver transplant medicine. And that was really the start of my journey. I fell in love with the subspecialty. I really enjoyed taking care of the patients. And really for me, it became apparent that the liver is the most brilliant organ in the body. And I was just captured both by the nature of the diseases. I think they're very interesting, by the treatments that we have available, and then for some of the diseases that we don't have treatments available for, and that we can help patients on their pathway to liver transplant. And so also getting to experience liver transplant medicine was a real enticing part of the subspecialty for me. After I was at King's College London, I stayed in London a little bit longer. I then went to the United States, where I worked in Philadelphia for a decade, and then moved to Toronto.
Wonderful, thank you. It sounds like you have a really interesting past, especially coming to Canada, which is really neat. So could you share a little bit more insight into children's liver disease?
Yeah, so I think the first and the most important theme that I would like to reiterate is that children are not small adults. And so we need pediatric liver specialists, pediatric hepatologists, because we need, as we do in all aspects of medicine, to really think about children as unique entities. And there's two aspects of that. First of all, children can experience liver diseases that adults don't have. So there are different diseases that affect children. That's one aspect. The other aspect is that even if a child has a disease that adults may also get, they experience them at an earlier time in their life where they're still impacted by issues like growth and development. So that's another, children will experience even the same diseases as adults in a completely unique way. So that's the second aspect. So the first is different diseases. The other part may be diseases that are the same as adults but experienced in a different way. And then I think the third part really is that you can't take care of children without thinking about their family. And that includes parents, siblings, other caregivers. So we really have to approach their care as family-centered care, and be very holistic in how we approach that. So I think those are the three reasons why I think taking care of children with liver diseases is unique, and is a different experience.
Okay, great. Could you share the importance of doing research on children's liver disease?
Yes, so I think the first issue, as I mentioned, is that some of these diseases are unique to children. So we have to think about diseases that present. When I say present, that means that they become clinically apparent for the first time in infancy or in childhood. Children suffer predominantly, or almost many of the diseases we take care of are diseases that are inherited or have a genetic contribution. And so they occur or they appear early in life. And that's why we need research that is uniquely targeting those diseases, to think about diseases that occur right from the beginning of life or in the early years of life. We also have to think about research that can help understand how these diseases affect growing children. So children who haven't acquired all their growth milestones, their developmental milestones. So research into pediatric liver disease is crucial because otherwise we will A, miss specific diseases that predominantly affect children, and B, we may miss the effect of some of these diseases on growing children. So we need people to think about pediatric liver disease and pediatric liver disease research in a separate way, but whilst keeping the continuum into adulthood in mind. I'm very fortunate to collaborate both on a research basis and on a clinical basis with my adult hepatology colleagues. I don't just think of my patients up until the age of 18 and then not think about what happens to them beyond. I think about transitioning them to adult care. But the research part has to encapsulate that transition portion as well.
Great. So if I could just ask, kind of put this out there, I know it wasn't one of the prepared questions in advance, but could you share a little bit more about some current research that you are working on in the liver disease space? If you are working on research currently, I think our community would love to know a little bit more about that.
Yes, certainly. One of the most active areas for research for me is in Alagille syndrome. Alagille syndrome is a rare pediatric liver disorder. It affects the liver and then other organ systems as well, such as the liver, in addition to the liver, the heart, the kidneys, and the blood vessels. And it's almost always diagnosed in childhood. And one of the things that we have seen is that a lot of the research that existed in this space prior on this rare liver disorder came from predominantly North American centers or a few select European centers. And so what we sought to do was to create a database that drew from real world experience from the whole world, so that the research wasn't just skewed towards the tertiary referral centers, the academic centers that have all the research funding. We wanted to know what Alagille syndrome and what liver disease and Alagille syndrome looked like across the world. So we set up a global database called the GALA study, and we now have 1,600 patients from all over the world in that database. It's run by sick kids, but we really have benefited tremendously from collaboration from investigators in 89 centers in 35 countries. So it's a truly global effort. But what we can learn from that, and what Canadian patients with liver disease can learn, is that rather than just having the perhaps somewhat narrow sick kids view of what Alagille syndrome looks like, I can now reflect what the world view of Alagille syndrome looks like. So what is your risk of a liver transplant if your child is born with liver disease? What will happen to that patient with liver disease in their history? How could liver disease affect other organ systems? And so we've developed this database, and we've just had our first manuscript accepted, but we hope to publish a lot more from this robust data set. So we're focusing on this rare disorder, Alagille syndrome, but also studying this rare disorder has also helped us understand other less rare liver disorders. One of the things that we have participated in is in clinical trials to study a new class of drugs to treat itching, pruritus associated with liver disease. And the initial studies have been done on patients with Alagille syndrome, and the drugs have now been approved in both the US and Europe to treat itching. This new class of drugs are called IBAT inhibitors, and they've been very effective in treating itching associated with liver disease in Alagille syndrome. And now we're looking into, and others are looking into indications to treat them for people who itch for other causes of liver disease. We know that itching is a very problematic issue for patients with cholestatic liver disease, and this class of drugs is likely to be helpful for other children and adults with other forms of liver disease. So it's an exciting time where studying a rare disease has actually led to the discovery of a class of drugs that could be helpful for many patients.
Yeah, that sounds really cool. I love that it's also a global study, which is also really, I feel, impactful. So very cool. Thank you for sharing that. So kind of a follow-up to that, what excites you most about the research and progress being made in your fields of expertise and in the broader liver disease community of diseases?
That's a lovely question. I think traditionally, and for most of my career, all of the drugs that we have used in pediatric liver disease have been off-label use. And by that, I mean they're drugs that are considered safe, but they haven't been specifically studied in children. We sort of tend to extrapolate from adult research, and we use them because we know they're safe. I think what's shifted in the last 5 years is this focus that we really do need to do clinical trials or research that are focused on pediatric liver diseases. And that's been the biggest change for me that I've seen. As I mentioned, we've participated in clinical trials for the treatment of pruritus in Alagille syndrome, and also in another rare group of pediatric liver diseases called PFIC, progressive familial intrahepatic cholestasis. And at SickKids, we're also participating in clinical trials for the treatment of biliary atresia, which is the #1 cause for pediatric liver transplantation. So the real, what I would say, paradigm shift is that we're understanding that we have to do clinical trials that involve children, that include children as participants in these trials. And of course, we have tremendous safety measures to make sure that no child is harmed in the process of doing a clinical trial. But if we can do these trials safely, which we are doing, we can generate trials that are targeted for children with liver diseases, rather than just extrapolating from adult data. And that really excites me, this focus on studying drugs for children, new drugs for children, by running these trials in children. And at SickKids, we're very proud to participate in a number of these trials, and to bring a drug to market, a new drug, and to participate in that process is really the most exciting part, I think, in my career at the moment.
Yeah, it definitely sounds exciting. And yeah, I love what you're saying about, flipping it to not just taking data from like adult patients, but making kids a focus for those new drugs, which is really, really exciting. Before I get to the last more like fun question, is there anything else that you'd like to share on liver disease in children, or what you do, or the importance of understanding what liver disease is? Is there anything you'd like to add?
Yes, I think sometimes liver disease gets sidelined in the world of medicine as something difficult for people to understand. Even within medicine, physicians find liver disease difficult. I would flip that on its head and say liver disease is challenging and exciting. It's a fantastic area of research. It's a wonderful group of patients to take care of. And even though funding has been difficult, I personally have benefited tremendously from the Canadian Liver Foundation, who have funded me on several occasions, and have it's not just a project that ends with that funding. There's been projects that we've then been able to generate the initial data to develop into bigger projects, then to seek federal funding from the government and other sources. And I cannot overestimate the importance of that funding that we get from the Canadian Liver Foundation, that take projects from an idea to something that becomes meaningful, that then can be leveraged into something big. So I think that's something that I really wanted to share with people, because liver disease itself gets sidelined, and then children within liver disease are such a small subset of that. And so researchers in this space are incredibly grateful to the Canadian Liver Foundation for all their efforts on our behalf. And so I would just encourage people to say, don't let these issues get sidelined. Children are important. And again, I go back to my first message. Children are not small adults. They need a group of physicians and researchers and scientists who think about them as unique entities.
Thank you for sharing that. I think that's a really important message. Okay, so the last question, a bit more fun. If you were in a different career path, unrelated to what you do now, what would it be?
Yeah, so this is actually something I've thought about many times. I would most definitely be a lawyer. I think people think that if you're not going to be a physician or a scientist, that you might be in something else that's health related. And actually, no, because I think the way that physicians think is quite analytical. We also are not afraid of taking exams. And I've often thought that the career that would probably suit me the best, other than what I do, would be law. I'd have to think about which aspect of law, and maybe I'd end up in health law or law associated with the pharmaceutical industry, because I would find that relevant to taking care of people. But I think the law is very analytical and thoughtful. That's probably what I would do. I mean, I might like to have said that I wanted to be, a movie star, but I'm pretty sure I know where my talents lie, and I think I'd be better off in law than in anything else.
Sounds good. That's fair enough. Yeah, and they're definitely, I feel like they could be similar in a sense. Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you for making the time to join us today. We know that doctors and researchers are so busy these days with everything going on. So we appreciate you sharing your knowledge with our community. And thank you for continuing to do the wonderful work that you do. So
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
that's the end of our episode today. Thank you for joining us, everyone.